Hello again, everybody, and welcome back to the Accelerator with Michael Conniff. That's me. We are a podcast happily devoted to startups and entrepreneurs, accelerators, incubators, founders, and also the VC angel family office investor community that serves them and that works with them. You can find us, of course, on every major podcast platform, including Apple, Audible, Amazon, you name it. And also, we are now on video. We always have been actually on YouTube, but we have added Spotify on video. So both audio and video on Spotify. Please subscribe, give us a nice rating, tell your friends, share it. And we appreciate all of that. So today I'm very excited. I'm going to welcome to the podcast Chris Foltz. Welcome, Chris. Great to have you. He is the global entrepreneur in residence at Founders Institute, which is a global startup accelerator, and other things as well. And he is the managing director at Responsible Solutions with his partner Russell Brand. We'll get into all of that. But Chris, it's great to have you. Thanks for doing this.
You know, I'm such a fan, Michael. I think you're such a shining light in the global startup ecosystem. You've been such a supporter.
We're done.
Hey, listen, you get that's the Chris Foltz charm that you're going to get, and it's really one of those things. I've been a fan of you. I've listened to your podcast for a while, and I know you've been a huge supporter of a lot of the things I've been doing in Africa. And I'm like, why is Michael Conniff out here supporting me like this? So I'm honored to be here with you.
Well, ditto, and it's nice of you to say that. I think we've done. I know we've done over 50 of these, and I feel like this podcast in particular with you is kind of like the beginning of chapter 2 of this podcast, because it's been great. We've talked to lots of founders, but I feel like I'm getting enough knowledge and enough understanding of it to be dangerous, to be more dangerous now. And so I think it's really going to get interesting. But, I want to start actually with what you're doing with Founders Institute. And then we'll get into your incredible personal story. But the Founders Institute stuff. So I came across you because you seem to be everywhere. You seem to go on a world tour where you were working with startups in how many countries? Give us a list of some of the countries.
I mean, like just in Africa alone, six countries inside of there. But I was the top-rated mentor in the Benelux region, Amsterdam, Luxembourg, all of that, Sweden, Abuja, Nigeria, all the way to Kampala, Uganda, Accra, Ghana, South America, and then you get into the Gulf region, and really touching. It's like this, Michael. In Founder Institute, historically, these have all been in silos, right? So each city, each kind of country has their own programs. And during the pandemic, I accidentally started mentoring in Abuja, Nigeria. And I was based in San Francisco program, which was very exciting. There was a cannabis accelerator, believe it or not, there, and I've spent some time working in that industry. So it was a great experience, and I did so well there and made some impact that they brought me over to Silicon Valley. Somebody reached out to me on LinkedIn from Abuja, Nigeria, and they're like, "Hey, Chris, can we do office hours?" As mentors, we're more or less teachers at a university, if you will. And I said, of course, I'd love to do office hours, not realizing that that's not really an option in the system. So I got to do that. And then from there, I guess it has been a world tour. And I've been able to see things from different perspectives. I think we all get, focus on Silicon Valley. Right. I spent some time working in Colombia this past year with some founders down there. And I'm telling you, that's toe to toe. What I saw there, toe to toe with Silicon Valley. Same thing in the UAE and in Qatar. These areas, some of the most prolific things I'm seeing right now aren't just based in Silicon Valley anymore. And that's exciting.
I think my theory on that is that, of course, the pandemic had a lot to do with that because, and I sort of put that together with Zoom and with video conferencing because all of a sudden everyone was having conversations. And if you were in Colombia, other than the time difference, though there isn't much of a time difference in Colombia, right? But if you're talking to Qatar or UAE or other places, there's these big time differences. But other than that, once you're up and talking to somebody, it's just a level playing field.
I was scared. I was really scared, Michael. Like you bring up the level playing field. You would think that, right? Right when you're going in. I had an imposter syndrome. I was scared to death to be a mentor in Sweden, in London, right? I was accepted in Africa, I was accepted in India, but how are the Europeans going to take this ultra American individual that I am? I have all the faults that any
You
American can
actually
have.
live in Las Vegas and you have like some kind of lava lamp behind you.
I
So yeah,
do, I
I
do.
would say
Yeah,
you're
some people.
American. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a very, very much so.
But
And
you're wearing a
it's
Patagonia hat. If you're listening, got the lava lamp and the Patagonia hat. So
I
you got it
am,
all.
and
You
believe
got
it or
it all
not, I worked in cannabis at one point. You would just think I was around in the '60s for that matter, but I've just I'm an ordinary guy that's done some extraordinary things. But the only reason for that is because I do extra, right? And that's why I'm involved in all these countries. This last year, Michael, I was honored to one of the first startups that I mentored out of Abuja, Nigeria, a company called Woman of Eight, working towards helping close the gap in STEM careers for women in Nigeria. That was just named Startup of the Year in the continent of Africa. And I mean, that was a
congratulations to
pretty,
you and to them. Yeah.
yeah, it's a pretty remarkable thing, but that's the great world of acceleration that we have.
So
And people
let
like
me,
you
I
play a
got
role.
it. You asked, we met originally around Africa, but let me point out to you, I just retweeted something today. It's something called STEM Girls in
Okay.
Africa,
Yeah.
with a plea that they're about to run out of money. So if you go to my LinkedIn account, you'll see that post. Um, so it's still obviously an issue, as are many things in Africa. But I want to before we move on, I want to drill down on this. Okay, what does it take to be rated the best mentor advisor to accelerators? What is the Chris Foltz secret sauce?
You know,
That's what
the,
I'd like to know.
the truth of the matter is, I guess it's being authentic, Michael. Authenticity is
My
the new
favorite word.
disruptive.
Yeah, my
Yeah,
favorite word.
there's a big difference between being authentic and being honest, right? Authentic is kind of a thing that pertains to you, and it requires you being vulnerable, like to explain to the startup founders all your failures, and helping them avoid that is more important. And Russell and I, we work with a lot of interesting, from rocket engines to farms, and we're really focused on education right now. And I've been in the rooms with big people in education. I learn from them, but I also go learn from elementary school teachers, right, about the
Mhm.
needs. And because I have these kind of diverse perspectives, I think it changes the game. And I'm also different than most mentors, right? And I do office hours. I do sessions at 4 a.m. in different countries. And
Mhm.
for me, it's not some quest to be the best. It's the quest to learn. Learning is
Mhm.
a gift, right? And I spend as much time as possible learning from everyone. And then I spend just a tad bit less than that teaching. And as long as I keep that ratio in place, I expect to make more impact along the way.
Well, I think it's pretty clear you've made a huge impact. But I want to talk about the authenticity, your authenticity. So, when I teach my storytelling for startup workshops, um, that is the first thing I say. I say this entire presentation, figuring out your story as a founder, is about authenticity. It's about knowing who you are. So, tell us, and I know you have what I would call kind of a fraught personal story. So take us kind of to I want to hear the whole thing.
All
So take
right.
us
All right.
to the beginning, and I know you've been through addiction and still are on guard about that, and still are doing what you have to do to stay clean and sober, etc., and straight.
I'm a survivor, buddy. Right. And that's
You're,
really, that's
you're a
really what it
survivor,
is.
right? So I think this is important because I think people they think that those who have done well have not had to deal with the same kind of problems they have. But let's start right. I'm going to let you start wherever you think the
Yeah.
story starts.
It's like this, Michael, like all of my experiences really is what basically gives me the ability to help people these days. Right. So I'm very candid about it. There's even a thing on BBC about my addiction, where it says, a trip to the dentist led to Vicodin addiction in prison, right? So when that comes out on the BBC talking about me,
Okay.
it puts things in perspective. But you see, that was after I was in recovery, so my first addiction was politics. I started that when I was 12 years old, right? When you grow up in Republican Party politics and start being a strategist before you're old enough to drive, work on your first presidential race before you're old enough to vote, you get this really jaded perception of reality. And, ultimately, out on the campaign trail, I got a call from back home, and my mom, who I love dearly, was diagnosed with cancer. So I moved back home to her basement.
And where
And,
was that?
that's the
Where
thing.
was that? Where was that, Chris?
I'm originally from Rockford, Illinois, not too far away
Okay.
from Chicago. My parents were both in law enforcement for 35 years. So it was a very interesting upbringing.
Hmm.
And I come from a Sicilian family, although Foltz is my last name, that's my dad's side. On my mom's side, it's Terranovas and Arbisis. And so when your family member gets sick, you come home and help, right? That's just built into the culture. And I came home to help, and I had a Vicodin prescription left over from when I had my wisdom teeth pulled. And I literally made a photocopy of this and went out and filled up and got about almost 3 months worth of Vicodin and did all of that in 2 weeks. Now, you either come out of this dead or addicted. And if I had to pick two or one of those things, I guess I'm more happy that I was addicted. But
And this was because you were so upset about your mother?
I don't want to blame it on that, right? I was so upset with
But that was the
myself.
trigger. That was the
Yeah,
trigger.
well, it perhaps added to the equation, but it was more that I was feeling inadequate being the person I was. My mother was sick and not being able to help her. I moved myself away from politics. Actually, I did get involved in local races. The funny thing is, deep in my addiction, I was the campaign manager for a part in a sheriff's race in that county.
You
So
know, you
imagine
know,
running a sheriff's race while you're an addict.
yeah, I can't imagine. But and Chris, I just forgive me for interjecting, but just today I got a call, an email from an entrepreneur in Africa that I'm helping, and he said his mother. It's like your story. He said his mother had died. It kind of sent him into a spiral, and he took 2 weeks off from his business, which was a very smart thing to do, and he got help and he sought help, and now he's kind of back on track. I'm sure he's dealing with a lot of stuff, but he said, my mother died, my co-founder left, and I just kind of
It's
the
trauma. Those are
diagnosis
traumas, Michael.
was burnout.
And
Yeah, yeah.
yeah,
So
and
keep going.
burnout's a result of trauma, right? To be
Yeah.
honest. And what is interesting is how I handled all this, right? So my mother passed away. That's what stopped the addiction. And ultimately, a judge, one of the first political campaigns I worked on, I did what would be considered a petty crime, a petty theft. You do a lot of weird things to support addiction at that time. And he put out a $250,000 warrant for me. Now, this would have been something you're out of jail for $300, not me. $250,000 bail bond set. And he knew I would die from drug addiction. And he was good friends with my mom. And I thank him to this day, Judge Ron White in Winnebago County, Illinois. I spent the next 119 days in jail. During that time, everything I owned in my mom's house, her house was foreclosed upon. Everything was thrown into the garbage, the dumpster. I had nothing. But you see, when I was in jail, Michael, and I met a lot of interesting people. And, some of them were corner drug dealers that if you taught them some Wall Street techniques, they'd be the best stockbrokers. And some of them had street businesses. And if they just had a little bit more entrepreneurial training, they would have tremendous breakout success. So I knew that I needed to find a way to take my political career and help people when I got out of jail. And I guess I was my first client, if you will. I needed to figure out how to channel all this stuff I chose entrepreneurship. So I started a public relations firm, realizing that a lot of people like me would have scarlet letters coming out of jail, and I wanted to help them kind of break through from that. And it grew and it grew and it became larger and larger. And we had 400 clients around the world. And it
Wow.
became to the point where those type of people that I set out to work with weren't the client roster anymore. It was somewhat upsetting. They were big. Everything I should have been happy about, I wasn't, because it wasn't my original intention. And then I got a call one day from back home. My best friend, who I got into addiction with, they found him dead of a heroin overdose. Ultimately, my addiction went from Vicodin to Oxycontin to heroin in a very short period of time. And I tried everything to prevent my friend from dying, and give him opportunity and jobs. Nothing worked. So at that point, I had an office floor in downtown Chicago's River North, a posh area of Chicago, all these celebrity clients and people all over the world. And I was on television the next day, and I went on and basically told the world I'm no longer taking clients, and that I was going to move my office to the most dangerous neighborhood in Chicago, Some would call it the hood. I put that up in quotes for those listening, because it's not me. And at the end of the day, I figured if I couldn't stop my friend from dying, I could perhaps stop people from starting. So we spent the next 3 years doing everything we could for free, helping startups in the south side of Chicago, the west side of Chicago, building neighborhood farms, building renewable energy systems, and just amazing stuff where I really got to see what it's like when you have everything kind of against you. And still, we found the ability to make success with that. So that's what ultimately really started my entrepreneurial journey, Michael.
Yeah, that's incredible. So you were still in Chicago at that point, I suppose,
Yes.
and
Yes.
and you were sort of working on the ground with entrepreneurial type people or people who are starting businesses in some cases, but the world of accelerators and entrepreneurs was really still ahead of you. So what led to
It
that
was. So
shift?
what happened was, ironically, I built this one machine that would recycle water. We needed to have something to take rainwater in a domestically battered women's shelter and give them fresh water for this neighborhood farm. And ultimately, I built this thing, and it worked really well. That we did a showcase at my office in the west side of Chicago with the little inventions. Somebody called me the Elon Musk of Chicago at that time because we were doing innovative things, but for the neighborhoods that are often forgotten. And somebody from the cannabis industry said, listen, we need this particular thing out in Nevada. The industry's brand new there. We need to recycle water. There is no water in the desert. Let's
Right.
work on this. So they brought me out there, and I got in. It was the first role I had in the cannabis industry, served as an executive. Those owners did not get along well, so that company didn't go anywhere. And then I did my own pursuits in that industry and moved all the way up in the largest media company in cannabis, where I was the number 2 there. And I was chosen to be a mentor in this brand new accelerator that Founder Institute was doing in San Francisco that
Cannabis
was going to be
accelerator.
focused on cannabis industry.
Yeah.
Right. And
Yeah.
at that point, I had such diverse experience in that industry. And it's not about touching plants for me. I care about the educational outcomes that come from the tax dollars from cannabis. I care about these worldly things that come from it. Cannabis is no different to me than rocket engines. Sorry, cannabis industry, I love you. But to me, it's about what can be done with this. And I took that one mentoring. Some of the greatest mentors ever were in that program. Like, all the cool kids table from the cannabis industry, some of the most effective leaders were in there in Founder Institute's program. And I went on to actually be the top rated mentor in that program my first time. And I think it was because I spent that time in jail. I spent that time on the ground working in the neighborhoods that nobody wants to go in. And I spent that time building technology that helped an industry. Right. So from there, it's been the world from there. And it's so funny, Michael, I'll be working in somewhere like Africa. And then when somebody finds out that I have some cannabis industry experience, all of a sudden 10 hands raised in the room, because you see these innovations in the cannabis industry from a farming perspective happening all over the world now. And America's leading that way. So it's great to at least have that knowledge in my wheelhouse.
And when you talk to an entrepreneur or you talk to a founder, um, what I know when I talk to a founder, I have something pretty specific I want to know pretty quickly. What's your approach? What's your technique? What do you
You know
want to
what?
know? What do you want to know
Yeah.
walking in?
Russell and I are somewhat different than this, right? And Russell really likes to look at the kind of mechanics, right? There's a lot of things that'll cancel you out to an investor. So many people try to get people to say yes. It's about eliminating the ability for them to say no. And where I generally find that I like to spend my time on the human being, right? That I believe in the prospects of humanity, Michael, and that's why I work in acceleration, because startups is such a huge component of innovation for this planet, right? And even realms beyond this planet, for that matter. So to me, it's all about the founder and the team, and how the founder talks about their team members, right? And you can tell the difference between somebody that, I like to break leaders down into 3 buckets: creators, doers, and fixers. Fixers are in the middle of that matter: creators, fixers, and doers. And I'm a fixer, right? I kind of a blend of both a doer and a creator. But you see, sometimes there's different techniques, different leaders. It's about leadership. Okay. Anybody can build something revolutionary just by building a team, but can you lead it to get where it needs to be to change the world? And that always comes down to the team, even to me, before traction.
But what Okay, so then I would translate that a little bit by saying you're either looking for leadership qualities in the leader, and or you're looking for leadership potential. So what are some of the tells, if you will? You're in Las
Yeah,
Vegas. I can use that phrase. What are the
that
tells?
works, right?
What are the
Right
tells?
away, right away, Michael. If they don't know their customer, we'll know. Russell and I will know in 5 minutes whether a
Okay, but
company's going to be successful.
is that leadership though?
Yes, it is, because some people, to be a strong leader, you need to get away from your own bias, right? And it's important to understand your bias. It's important to understand what you're effective at, and ultimately that leads down to them truly understanding their stakeholders, right? Great leaders understand their stakeholders. And customers are stakeholders, just like team members, just like investors. So when they take the time to actually try to cancel themselves out from being a company first by proving that there is no market, that takes strong tenacity and leadership. That's mental toughness.
I'm not sure I
Everyone thinks they're
understand
going to
that. When
start.
you say that they try to what do you mean by
You know
cancel?
what generally what happens is when people go out there and survey whether they're going to have a product offering or something like this, they're always looking for people to confirm it, right? And it's very easy to find a room of
They
100
want
people to say
confirmation.
yes,
Yeah, yeah,
yes. But you
that's
see, what it is you need to go out there and you need to try to disprove the validity of your product in the market, right? And when you do that, you save so much time. So Russell and I, we used to focus on working on helping people become successful. What we focus on now is preventing failure. If we can prevent failure, that's doing much more for the universe than just focusing on the small bucket of people that are most likely going to be successful already. The biggest fear that I have, Michael, is this, that because the leaders aren't prepared, they don't know their customer, whatever the reason may be, that the solution to something like addiction, the solution to something like cancer ends up dying on the floor in some Silicon Valley warehouse because the failure rate of startups is 92%. And oftentimes people have the greatest ideas, but why they fail is because people don't know how to lead. People don't know how to form the right team. People don't know how to understand their own shortcomings, because when you do that and you have an idea that customers say they want, you're going to have success. And I could tell right away by the leader if somebody's going to have success.
so. How do you prevent failure? If so, you go and you meet with you meet with the founder, and you're like, okay, he's going to fail. First of all, what are kind of the one or two or three things you see that indicate failure, and then how do you fix it?
There's always sometimes a challenge with people that are scientist founders, right?
Mhm.
Here you have people that they may have a deck that starts out with 200 pages, their pitch deck. I'm like, what? They have every detail, every fact, everything in there. And they're right. They've got patents and everything. But the likelihood of them having success, the way they present it, the way that they share it with other people is very, very low. So it's not that they don't have something that matters. It's just going to get put to the bottom of the pile when some analyst and a VC is looking into things, because
Mhm.
that analyst doesn't understand their pitch. So being able to relate and teach the people in the room when you're presenting is absolutely important. Narrative, the persuasive argument that people make, that's often missing. Jenny Chang, my colleague out of San Francisco, she always focuses on making sure that there's a persuasive narrative that's going on throughout the thing. There's an MIT study that came out and says, do your headlines tell the story? Do your pitch deck slide headlines tell the story? If nobody read anything on the page, could they just read those and understand what you're doing? That's key as well. Overvaluation is a huge problem.
Let me
And
just stop you just
yep,
for
go
one
ahead.
second. So so storytelling being my personal sweet spot as a writer, my whole life. And I think I just want to put a plug in for storytelling here, which is that um, it's more important than brand. And
It definitely is,
I
buddy.
have figured out why. I think so. Brand and brands are an externality. Okay, there's something that happens outside, in the marketplace, when people are interacting with your product or service. Story is an internality. In other words, I don't even know if that's a word, but it's
Hey, we made it
internal.
up here live.
It's internal, right? So what that means is that authenticity, authentic story coming from your personal experience, just like you with the cannabis and having all the things you went through to get up to that point. But the authenticity of the personal story should drive everything. Ideally, it doesn't always. It doesn't have to, but ideally it does. And I think that's, for me, that's my secret sauce.
There's one
That's
thing
where
more important than that, Michael.
yeah. Go
That's the
ahead.
one thing there's one thing more important than storytelling, and the business I'm in is story creating, right? And that means from the very beginning, making sure that the founders are creating the correct story and then actually getting that story told, right? And
So how do you
sometimes
do
that's
that?
a different,
How do you do that?
when I was in PR, people would come to me all the time and said, Chris, we want to be on the news. And I would say to them, no problem, do something newsworthy. Right. Same principle when it comes down to creating a story. It's about really what is the journey that you've gone on to discover this product matters. Sometimes we need to go out there and create a pilot that creates a narrative that's worth being told. Right. So in order for storytelling to be successful, we have to make sure that they're out there creating the right future for themselves. The right story is being created and written every single day. Startup, the whole startup ecosystem is a process, not an event, right? So that very process starts with, basically telling yourself, this is the story I want to create. It's very interesting what they do at Amazon when they come up with product innovation. They have their product engineers and everything write a press release and more or less say about the product they're going to do. That's one of the first steps. And then they basically go and look at that press release that was written by somebody that's not a press person, but it's them saying what they want the world to believe about this product when it comes out. And that really helps them peel back and understand what the steps are to get there. And I
And
implore
I
people.
want to underline that, just if people don't know what you're referring to. So under Jeff Bezos, Amazon, the way they present a new idea is with a 6-page press release. So when somebody comes into a meeting with Jeff Bezos or other executives, they hand out a press release, and that's 6 pages, and they all spend 15 minutes reading it before anyone says a word, and then they discuss what the press release, what's in the press release. I would add one little bit of seasoning to that, which is that stories and storytelling can be, in my opinion, can be aspirational. So I think this goes to what you're saying about creating a story. You can aspire to something, right? That's really important. You may not be that person today. You probably are not that company today, but you can aspire to it, and you can tell that story. You can tell the story about how you're going to do that, and that can be really, really persuasive.
In this world, there's short-term success, and that only takes one win. You don't even need to have a good product. You just need to have a medium to talk about an idea, and you can have a win as a company. Long-term success requires you to have, a plan, a model to get somewhere, understand your customer. And it's not about the idea. It's much putting into practice, but you need to have 2 wins then, a win for you and a win for your stakeholders, your customers, right? But if you want to change the world, Michael, and a lot of people come to me and they're like, Chris, my idea is going to change the world. That requires vision. And vision is something that allows you to see beyond the status quo. And it requires 3 wins always: a win for you, a win for your stakeholders, and a win for the world. That means, and who else lives in the world is your competitors, right? So when you find a way to partner with your competitors on some initiative that benefits all of your customers, realize those are the things that I've always focused on, doing the outside the box approaches, such as partnering up with our competitors towards an initiative that impacts people, right? And when you do these things, that's where real acceleration comes from in the actual business launch. Think outside the box. Relationships are the answer to that.
So I can't believe it, but we're really just about out of time. I'm going to ask one last question, Chris, which is, what would you say to that entrepreneur in Africa that I mentioned? You've spent a lot of time in Africa, but basically he's just gotten back, actually not into the office because he also lost his office. Well, he's in his home, right? So he's remote. And like every entrepreneur, he's running out of money, and he's got a great idea, but he's really questioning everything.
I love that this is the thing, Michael. It's like this. I've been spending my time working with the Evergreen Fund and Red Door Life. It's a one of these treatment centers for people with trauma and recovery and all this. And we're bringing accelerators inside of that program, right?
That.
I can only imagine how much more my life would have been if, when I was in recovery at the very beginning, it was in a process of entrepreneurial, recovery. This is the thing. What you learn from addiction is very powerful. What you learn from trauma in life is very powerful. The entrepreneurship world is trauma riddled. Every single day is a roller coaster for people in this.
Yeah.
So this guy is definitely, my friend in Africa, you're definitely ahead of where you think you are. You just need to understand how to channel the experiences, even the painful ones,
Right.
into things that help you get across the finish line. It's what grit is. In people in recovery, people that have faced addiction, people that have started over, doesn't matter if it's from a divorce, doesn't matter if it's from bankruptcy, doesn't matter if it's from drug and alcohol addiction. You have grit. You know how to overcome obstacles, right? And so I would love to talk to this person. There's a support group that we've created that's literally for entrepreneurs in recovery, right? And it's built around channeling that. So I'd be happy to get him in touch with
That's
that.
great. That's great stuff, Chris. This is all great. We've been talking to Chris Foltz. He is the global entrepreneur in residence at Founders Institute. He's also the managing director of Responsible Solutions with his partner Russell Brand, and you've mentioned Jenny Chang several times as well. I want to remind our listeners, this is the Accelerator podcast with Michael Conniff, available on all major platforms for podcasting, also on YouTube and video, and Spotify now in video. So make sure to look for that. Give us a good rating if you like what we're doing. Subscribe for sure. Tell your friends. Share it. You can find more of me and my writing on michaelconniff.com, michaelconniff.com. And don't be afraid to contact me on LinkedIn, where I do a lot of work and a lot of business. And that's where Chris and I met. Chris, thank you so much for doing this. You've been a tremendous. You are definitely the first part of a new phase for this podcast, and it's clear you're doing God's work. So thanks so much, and
I appreciate you, Michael.
We'll get you back here soon. We're just getting started.
I'll enjoy it.
Okay, thanks a lot.